Thank you for virtually attending the town hall on funding supports from different sources, federally, from BDC, from Farm Credit Canada. And still at this time, it's important to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. Thank you to the Port of Vancouver for sponsoring the Surrey Digital Town Halls. The Port of Vancouver is the largest port in Canada, trading with more than 170 world economies, with nearly 95% of port activity focused on Canadian import and export markets. And let's give a great shout out to all the people involved in our global supply chain who are helping Canada weather this storm and receive the goods that we all need, both businesses and residents. Let's give a great shout out to our marine pilots, terminal workers, truck drivers, and railroaders. Just a few instructions before we begin. This session is being recorded. The link will be sent to you after the session is over for you to share. All attendees are muted. All of the facilitator contact information is in the chat room and will also be sent to you after the session. At the Surrey Board of Trade, we are getting questions daily from our members trying to navigate the federal, provincial, local government supports for business. And there's a lot to cover. We're going to take questions in the chat function only. So just post your question in the chat function, not in the question function. And we will respond to all of those questions as best as we can. And if we can't get to them, we will get back to you after the town hall. Remember, the Surrey Board of Trade is here for you. Feel free to email me at anita@businessinsurrey.com. The Surrey Board of Trade has an active, daily updated COVID-19 emergency portal at businessinsurrey.com. Please make sure you visit that daily and often. The links are always updated. And I want you to know that the Surrey Board of Trade, we are on the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force to really identify any gaps that businesses and residents are facing, and also to ensure that we are preparing for post-pandemic economic recovery. Every week, we are on a City of Surrey pandemic call, also to ensure two-way communication between local government and different business organizations. And federally, every morning, we're on a call with Francis McRae with the federal government to really receive daily updates on different supports for the business community. We're here for you. We're all in this together at different levels, at different stakeholders. And I'm so pleased to introduce our first panelist. She's just going to give a brief overview of who she is, a brief overview of federal support programs, and she'll introduce her colleague Benoit as well from Ottawa. So please help me welcome Francis McRae. She is the Assistant Deputy Minister for Small Business and Marketplace Services for the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. Francis, a few words, please.
Thank you very much, Anita. And I'm afraid I can't start the video on my work mobile phone that I'm using here because the cameras are disabled, but I am going to give you a little bit of an overview of where we're at. So first of all, good morning, everyone. No, it's afternoon here in Ottawa, but we're happy to be here. I think I understand there's probably lots of questions that you have. As Anita says, we'll do our best to try to answer them. Typically, what we've been seeing, and Anita mentioned this conference call that I have every day at 11 a.m. Eastern time. Typically, we've been seeing lots of questions get asked, and we take them away and we look for answers to them. Just to be clear, my department, which is Innovation, Science and Economic Development, doesn't actually have accountability for delivering any of the measures of support that you are hearing about. We do have, though, a very strong interest in making sure that the business community has good information about what is happening and why, and that we have a way of bringing information in from business to government, to our other colleagues in different departments, as well as bringing information back out to the business community that may be relevant. So if I give you as an example, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the CER benefit. Of course, that is a measure for individuals, but many employers are saying, how does that apply in my situation as a self-employed person? Or, you know, is that measure better than, say, the wage subsidy that's still being refined? So there are lots of questions that people have about issues that are, you know, not strictly speaking my department's or my sector's area of interest. But we do see it's very important to be able to be an important link in and then back out to the business community. So that's the interest we have in speaking to you today. I would just say maybe a couple more things, Anita. So we have been working with various departments in Ottawa on better navigation within the government websites for business relevant information. And I think you will see now some continuous improvement in the one main website that the Department of Finance is keeping up to date for all kinds of purposes, but there are specific sections there for business that hopefully you will see improved and with more information added. So that's one thing, is that navigation is very important to us. While many others have navigation tools, we do feel it's part of the federal government's responsibility to be able to, you know, organize our information in the best way that we can in support of business. And that includes links to provinces and territories as well in terms of their own supports for business. And indeed municipalities, frankly. So that's one thing, the navigation is key. The second thing is you will have noticed that this government has been making successive announcements around programming where the terms of the programs have been changing based on feedback received from business people and from citizens. And that's a really important point. The government has made it very clear it continues to listen and then adjust. So whether it's new measures coming out or an expansion of measures that are already out there, you're seeing that happen in the part of government. So I just want to be clear. We see it that some of the issues that we are hearing from stakeholders through all kinds of avenues, including the daily phone call with business stakeholders, the shifts are indeed happening. So many of the questions people have about eligibility and other things are actually being taken care of in many respects by the changes that are being made to the measures that have been announced. So, you know, an example today that you might have seen is the Prime Minister, who last week talked about the emergency response benefit and ensuring that it could be to allow for people who receive the benefit to actually do a certain amount of work. So in other words, their work would not need to go to zero. Their income would not need to go to zero. And so you can see that there have been adjustments made for that, and allowing people to continue to receive the benefit while they're earning a certain amount per month. So that's just an example of what we're seeing. Is a lot of questions coming in where people are raising many specific cases and specific questions that are really, you know, the kind of thing that they would need a specific answer to rather than general answer. And some of that information is being fed into the policy development process and the program process, because if you have illustration of certain examples of problems or issues or people falling through the cracks, that's really important for our colleagues in the departments that are running these programs and developing these measures to understand how practically these are applying and what practical kinds of considerations and examples they need to keep in mind as they're developing both the policy work as well as the implementation and the rollout consideration. So that's, I guess, something else that I would say around the questions that are coming in. And, finally, I would say the questions coming in are also letting us understand where it is that we may have additional very specific gaps and issues. So in other words, measures that may not have been announced yet, that are still being thought about, or perhaps not thought about just yet, that are, that raise questions for us and for the around issues that they need to continue to try to find solutions for. And I think, again, the government's been quite clear. They want to be open to the solutions that are needed. So I think I would stop with that, Anita. I'm really happy that Benoit Tessier, my colleague, is here on the line, because Benoit is a partner of ours within Innovation, Science and Economic Development, who works in our industry sector group. And in fact, he has been working quite a lot with the Department of Employment and Social Development Canada on issues like the benefits, like the CERB, in particular, work sharing, how it interacts with EI. Some of those are still being discussed and determined, but I'm glad that I have Benoit as well here on the line, and will be able to hopefully answer many of your questions.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you, Benoit, for joining us from Ottawa. And next, we would like to hear from Paula Cruikshank. She's a Senior Vice President, Finance and Consulting for the British Columbia region for the Business Development Bank of Canada. Paula, can you explain the federal government support as it relates to the BDC loans for COVID-19?
For sure. Thanks very much, Anita. It's great to be here. I think folks have heard quite a bit about BDC in the media, and certainly we were one of the organizations that the government was able to use early on in this crisis. I will say that we are working. We're a complementary player in the ecosystem. We're here exclusively for entrepreneurs, but our role is primarily to fill in the gaps that commercial institutions may not currently address. And so I want to tell you really about three different things that we're doing. The first is our response to our existing clients, many of whom have seen disruption in their business. And that's if you or your clients are already working with BDC, we've put in place over 17,000 postponements, principal postponements of our loans for the next 3 to 6 months, depending on the situation. And so that is a significant amount of work, and really what we've been doing for existing clients. I want to tell you about two other things that we've been working on. The first is something that we hope will be in place as early as next week. And this is what people may have been seeing in the media or on our shareholders webpage, that kind of thing. And this is the Business Credit Availability Program, commonly known as the BCAP. And this is an opportunity for businesses to work with their existing lenders with BDC support. So believe it or not, up to, and I have to say this is also EDC who's participating in this initiative, and I'll explain how it all works. But basically, it's possible to work with your existing lender and the BDC to get up to 12.5 million for your business that is partially guaranteed by the EDC or the BDC. So basically, the process is to go through your existing lender, to agree on terms and conditions that are appropriate or acceptable to them. And then the idea is that those institutions will be bringing these transactions to BDC and EDC for up to 80% guarantee. So it's what we see as being the most efficient way of getting funds to your business. In normal course, BDC does about 5% of the loans to small and medium-sized enterprises across the country. So we wouldn't want, in this particular situation, to constrain the availability of lending because of our capacity. So we're working very hard with financial institutions to be able to, together with the government, provide the lending that businesses need. So to be clear, the way it works out is EDC is responsible for, they do a lot of work already excuse me, around guarantees. So if you have an operating line of credit, then it's really EDC that will be providing the guarantee. If you need cash or an actual lending facility, a loan, then it's BDC that will be providing that. And really, that's not as important as the work that you do with your financial institution. We're going to be in the background providing the support to the financial institution so that they can see through to helping your business. So that's the first piece that I wanted to mention. Obviously, there are also organizations that are already working with BDC, or organizations that may not necessarily be able to work with their financial institution. So we do have available to us additional funding, and that's a working capital loan up to $2 million that would basically supplement existing financial commitments that you have. And this working capital loan can be used for a variety of things to finance the fixed assets you may have in your business, to support marketing efforts during this time, basically to pay for advisory services, whatever it is that your business is needing at this particular time. That working capital loan is available. So the key questions are that we would be asking are really, how has your business been affected, and how do you see yourselves getting through to the other side? And it's basically how can this $2 million support your business along with the other resources that you may have at this time. So those are so with the work that we're doing with our existing clients in terms of postponement, the work that we're doing with financial institutions as well as our sister Crown EDC, and then the working capital loans that I just mentioned. Those are the three areas in which we're working very hard to support entrepreneurs. And I can get into more detail around that in the question and answer period, and tell you a little bit more about how things are going. But just wanted to lay those out. Thanks so much, Anita, and I'll turn things back over to you.
Thank you so much, Paula. And just a reminder to all attendees to post your questions in the chat function. And now we know that Surrey's land base, a third of it is agricultural, and it's so critical to know the supports available to our agricultural industry. So we're so pleased to have Avi Kay here from the Farm Credit Canada. He is the Director for Commercial Financing and a well-known face to the Surrey Board of Trade. Avi, your remarks, please.
Thanks very much, Anita. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me all right. Yeah, as far as FCC's assistance to the industry is concerned, for those that may not be familiar with FCC, as our name implies, we're here to service the agricultural production industry, but in addition to that, the agri-food and agribusiness industries as well. So as long as there's a dotted line, so to speak, to agriculture, we do lend to businesses beyond the farm gate, basically upstream and downstream across the entire agricultural value chain. As Paul already outlined, our role, in this crisis is really complementary, I would say, to the relationship that businesses already have with their existing financial institution partners. We did receive an enhancement in our capital base that has given us an additional $5 billion in lending capacity. As far as what that assistance looks like specifically, so for our existing customers, much like BDC, we're offering principal and interest deferments up to 6 months, principal deferments if a business can sustain itself on interest only for 12 months. But I think one of the key products, just to talk specifics, is an up to $500,000 line of credit, which we're essentially labeling a COVID line of credit, and that's available to both existing customers and new customers. With the caveat that because we are a lending institution, we do need to exercise the appropriate due diligence. But with the circumstances that we're all facing right now, basically our evaluation of the business is going to predate the current COVID crisis. So basically, we just need to understand, as Paula had outlined, how is your business doing, or how was your business doing before the crisis? How has the COVID-19 situation impacted your business? And we just need to understand what amount you need to sustain your business over the next 3 to 6 months. From an operating expense standpoint, what your cash burn rate is, and how will this line of credit assist you, to weather this crisis. I can get into the specifics as well, but just quickly, it is a general GSA secured general security agreement line of credit. We're not going to be taking any hard security, so to speak. For most businesses that already have relationships with their financial institutions and have existing lending in place, we do not need to be, to have the priority on that general security agreement. We will not charge fees, and the rate is prime plus 1. So, all things considered, it's a well-priced product for businesses. But again, a conversation needs to take place. So for any business that is in the agricultural, agribusiness, agri-food space, I would encourage you. Everything is clearly outlined on the FCC website at fcc.ca. It outlines everything that I've just spoken to, as well as a phone number for our customer service center. If anyone has any additional specific questions, but the application can be initiated online as well. And much like BDC is fielding many such inquiries and already put forward a lot of applications, FCC has as well. But our team's here to support the industry, support our existing customers, but obviously support other businesses out there that haven't had prior dealings with FCC. We're here to help, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks, Anita.
Thank you very much. Surrey has the greatest number of manufacturers in British Columbia, and many of them are food manufacturers, part of that food supply chain. So absolutely, Farm Credit Canada is so integral when we're talking about supports during pandemic time and even post-pandemic time. So thank you so much, Avi. So let's go to questions. We have a good 25 minutes for questions. Just a reminder to all attendees to please post your questions in the chat function. So the first one is, businesses are reluctant in terms of taking on more debt. If their revenue is significantly down, businesses are wondering how they're going to pay for their loans in the future. Paula, can you respond to that?
Yeah, I guess the piece that I can say is that Francis was talking about some of the support that is being provided federally. And I think if folks haven't necessarily read the fine print on the CEBA, I believe it's called, the Canada Emergency Benefit. Basically, it's a $40,000 loan, but up to $10,000 of that is forgivable, or essentially a grant if that loan is repaid before 2022, I believe. So that, that is a start. Unfortunately, as Avi mentioned, BDC and EDC and FCC were created to be commercial, and we are required by our legislation. Certainly, I know the BDC legislation better. We're required by our legislation to deliver a return to the government. It doesn't always have to be a big return, and we don't expect to be making a big return on the programs that we're offering. In fact, they are being offered at extremely good rates, but we don't offer grants. So there is a portion of grant financing available. I'd encourage you to take advantage of that. For businesses between $50,000 and $1 million in terms of payroll. But apart from that, yeah, I know it is not ideal, perhaps, to be adding to your debt burden in these times. But that is what we have on offer today.
Avi, do you have any words for that question?
Yeah, I'll echo what Paula spoke to. I mean, the key piece is looking ahead. Be it 3 months or heaven forbid 6 months. But it's important to just be realistic on what your cash flow is going to look like over that projected period. Again, at FCC, we are going to evaluate all applicants on their financial situation pre-COVID. So as long as the business can provide 2 years of financial statements, up to and including its most recent fiscal year, we're going to be evaluating business on that basis. We need to understand how COVID has impacted the business. It's incumbent on the business owner to, conduct a sensitivity analysis, I would say, on what the next, 3 and potentially 6 months look like, from a cash flow standpoint, sort of that, worst case, best case, realistic case scenario. That's going to dictate what their what their borrowing needs are going to be, but also at the conclusion of this crisis, what their repayment capacity will look like. And that's the conversation that I can speak on FCC's behalf that we are realistic. These are extremely challenging times that businesses are facing right now, and even businesses whose balance sheets may have been weaker before the crisis took hold, those problems have been compounded up now. We're going to take all that into consideration. Our mandate here is to support the industry. And I will state that we're not forcing all customers to fit in a box. We're going to have a conversation with every customer and evaluate every customer on their own merits. But the bottom line is that the business had to have been sustainable before the crisis, and that's really going to be integral into our decision of how we can support the business on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, just sorry to jump in, Anita, but it's a consistent approach for us as well.
So,
Yeah, Anita, it's Francis.
yeah.
I wonder if I could just add to that. So just, obviously business loans, got great spokespersons there. I just want to comment though about a couple of other areas where the government has introduced some measures. And I recognize that, debt instruments are not the be all and end all. But I would just point to the wage subsidy bill that was just passed on the weekend, which is kind of very much focused on helping employers with their costs, their payroll costs, 75% subsidy of wages paid out. So again, that's not a debt instrument. And the other area is the Canada emergency benefit, emergency response benefit. Again, not a subsidy, not a loan or debt instrument. It's literally a payout for self-employed. So I just want to point out, I recognize, and we certainly have provided the feedback back to the government that, debt instruments are not going to be what everyone needs. But there are other measures that are out there to support employers. And I guess I will just make one last point. And while I don't have a lot of detail on it, I think you probably have all heard the Prime Minister talk about the issue of rent. And this issue has been heard. And the government is working on measure around rent, which we hope will become a little more clear in the coming days, but I think that was just made very clear.
And we know that the provincial government, in a conversation I had with the Premier last week, is also working on a rent abatement strategy, property taxation pieces. So that is forthcoming, very delayed. Everyone is waiting for it because April 1st is come and gone, and May 1st is upon us very shortly. So just another question related to that, Avi, is companies typically have to demonstrate cash flow to repay loans. But in this environment, as mentioned, cash flow is definitely a challenge. Are the banks relaxing their usual credit risk management process and conditions for lending?
So I can't speak to what the chartered banks or credit unions are doing as far as their lending policy is concerned, but the individual who posed that question is correct. Having previously worked at a chartered bank and a credit union, they absolutely have their credit risk framework, and be it leverage ratios, liquidity ratios, those are part and parcel with that framework. Again, under the circumstances, given the situation that all these businesses are facing, FCC is absolutely aware, and our credit risk department is absolutely aware of the cash flow difficulties that businesses are facing. That's why they're coming to us, needing support. So I'll reiterate that our evaluation of a business and its suitability for this line of credit of up to $500,000 is going to be evaluated strictly on the basis of how it was doing before the crisis. Having said that, that determines the business viability piece. But having said that, we need to understand, what the plan is, and I don't want to scare anyone into thinking that it needs to be a 100-page sensitivity analysis. That's absolutely not the case. But as a business owner, again, it's incumbent on you to know your business and know what what your cash flow challenges are going to be in the weeks, and I say likely months ahead. So obviously, a lot of businesses have already taken the necessary steps to reduce their operating expenses. That includes laying off some staff, reducing staff hours. So all of that factors into, again, knowing and understanding what your operating expenses are going to be on a go-forward basis. You can reduce certain expenses. Other items, obviously, like your rent or lease payments, are hard costs, sunk costs. So as long as you can essentially, budget and forecast what the next, 3 to 6 months, I prefer to state that period, and then make reasonable projections as far as what your top line revenue may look like, that worst case, best case, realistic scenario. And we're happy to help a business owner determine that. Again, happy to have a conversation. But that's integral to us being able to go beyond the traditional requirements of we need to see leverage ratios, liquidity ratios within this band to support the application. Again, it's not as black and white as it would traditionally be, just given that all businesses are facing significant challenges right now.
Paula, any words from BDC on this question?
I think it's a very similar response. So yeah, we're looking at businesses before COVID. We want to talk about the plan, and that's the way forward. We're well aware of the challenges, and it's just being able to have that conversation.
So the next piece is to our friends in Ottawa, as it relates to workforce-related strategies. Are there any specific industry sector-specific strategies related to, or solutions for government action? We were in a skills shortage. We may have a surplus in labor. But is there any work being done by ESDC and Innovation Science Economic Development to work with specific industry sectors related to workforce strategies? Francis or Benoit?
So yes, thanks, Anita. So I can certainly take that question, and Benoit may want to add. I think the reality of it is that all of this is unfolding at just a breakneck pace for everyone. We talked earlier about the food production, food manufacturing, food distribution, obviously the areas where we have essential workers. We really do need to make sure that those are, looked at carefully. We had many industries concerned about the temporary foreign workers coming in, and so that one was looked at carefully. Organizations that are pivoting and moving into personal protective equipment or other things like hand sanitizer, all of those again being looked at very carefully. And then you have the industry sectors that are affected by these issues. And I think the government has talked about, as an example, the tourism and hospitality sector being one of the first ones, very hard hit. And there's a real recognition that this is a significant problem. Others have talked about the oil and gas industry, and that's not a new thing, but clearly the current challenges exacerbate the problems that we're seeing there. So, I think what the government has said is that they are open to looking at sector specific issues, and that analysis continues to be done and continues to be fed by industry feedback, by FPT discussions. And I think the key thing is right now the government's looking at rolling out the general measures, and then looking at where the gaps are in specific niche areas. And again, I think the government's been pretty clear about that, that they are really looking at, things like, what happens with the pre-profit company? How do they demonstrate revenues for work sharing? Not work sharing, for the wage subsidy. They're very, very particular kinds of business models that are not easy to just kind of package into a design that's basically done kind of on the fly in a couple of weeks. So that's where you're seeing the continued enhancement of existing measures. And then I believe the Prime Minister said, they are looking at particular sector strategies. So I think that is definitely very much on the table. I'm just going to take one other point while I have the floor. I see a lot of questions in the chat about the measures being, just 3 or 6 months. I will note for sure that the legislation on wage subsidy, for example, allows the government to extend the time frame. And so I think that, it's quite clear that the government is looking at what will need to be done in the next while. So there's continual, daily, hourly assessment of what's needed. And so I think that as we see, what's going on in the economy over the next little while, particularly, what's required from a public health perspective, you will see some adjustment. And I think that the last point there, I would say is, people were asking, is someone thinking ahead? And clearly, yes, the government is thinking ahead. The challenge right now is stability and trying to understand what we're dealing with. But, there are people, and you've seen media coverage about it, this is not a secret. There are people looking at, okay, where is the recovery? What's the recovery strategy? How does it work? And that's part of the conversations that I know that First Ministers are having as well. So maybe I'll just stop there. Benoit, is there anything you wanted to add?
Sorry, there's two Benoits. Maybe I'll start Benoit Cadieux. Francis, I think you covered it really well. I was going to add only one thing, because I was reading the question as well on the chat. Is that to reassure the participant here is that ISED is connecting very closely with pretty much every industry sectors out there through industry associations or other partnerships that we have in order to listen in to the concerns and the specificity of each of the sectors. And we had a mechanism prior to the crisis called economic strategy tables with some of the sectors, and we are currently exploring rebooting those in the context of a recovery period. So maybe that's it.
Is there any discussion on the CEBA's eligibility for smaller businesses whose owners take dividends or have started up later in 2019 and don't meet the payroll threshold?
So it's Francis here again. Yes, in fact, the government has talked about this and said that they are looking at this. This was a significant element of discussion in the parliamentary debates over the weekend around CEBA. So I think, there have been many examples of, payroll that's not quite at 50,000 or just over $1 million. Again, all that feedback is being looked at in real time. And I just want to, kind of make one point. One of the things that we normally do as government, and probably this is the same across federal and provincial and in fact municipal governments, is when we develop a program or a policy, we think it through, we get our evidence together, we're careful about, making sure we've got all of our considerations, thought through, and then we design accordingly, and then we launch all at the same time. One of the problems we have in this time frame, and I think ministers have been very clear about this, we're trying to design and launch and deliver in a matter of, fraction of the time that we normally have. And so therefore, the idea is getting, measures out and then being able to adjust rather than looking to get something out that's perfect and completely, squared with absolutely everything we're hearing and we know and all the evidence. So I just want to really make sure people understand the information we're getting back in is really making a difference on how the government is responding in real time.
Certainly, and we've been saying that also to our local media as well. So this is an unprecedented time for all levels of government to make decisions and provide supports to businesses. If a company participates in the work sharing program, do they still have the ability to lay off an employee if that situation should come up?
So it's Benoit Cadieux here from Employment and Social Development Canada. I'm certainly not an expert on the wage work sharing program, but I believe that employers do have the ability to lay off an employee, even though they are participating in the wage sharing program. That being said, I will take the question down and I will commit to provide a more fulsome answer.
Thank you so much, Benoit. A common question that we're getting from our not-for-profit sector or our societies is how they would go about seeking financial assistance. Currently, many societies, they run off of volunteers. They've not received funding yet. They don't have a payroll or any financial statement from a previous fiscal year, for example. And so they have a continued service to their communities to provide needs, whether it's for food, furniture, etc. Can anyone speak to the not-for-profit sector supports?
So it's Frances. Maybe what I'll do is I'll mention the fact that the current programming on the wage subsidy does include not-for-profit. And there is this particular way of charities and not-for-profits being able to calculate revenue and loss of revenue, which I understand was consulted and developed in collaboration with at least some kind of, umbrella nonprofit groups. So, I recognize that hasn't rolled out yet. I believe Minister Morneau said it would be 2 to 4 weeks to roll it out, but that is going to be available. As far as, individuals who are in need and financial need, I think the important thing is we do have the emergency response benefit that is up and running, and that in fact has gotten, I don't know if you've heard about it, but actually quite significantly good reviews about the speed at which it's being delivered. And I think, one of the things that I do is I direct people to that, because what we would not want to see is people and individuals in significant financial need who are not able to avail themselves of any other means. And so, Benoit Cadieux, I know you're on the line, but I think it's really important to make sure that we allow people to, have this avenue that they are assured that, so long as they meet the eligibility requirements, which are pretty simple for the emergency response benefit, that they're able to apply. Now, clearly, if eventually they get on wage subsidy, through they're brought back on a payroll, something like that, clearly there's a balancing out that will happen, so that there's no kind of simultaneous dipping into everything. I think taxpayers would not want us to design programs like that. That there should be a way for people to get immediate support through the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. So I don't know, Benoit Cadieux, if you have anything to add to that.
No, I don't think I have anything more to add. Thank you.
In Surrey, we have a thriving construction and development sector. And one of the questions posed is, after reviewing the wage subsidy programs, there seems to be a gap in eligibility requirements for large property developers whose revenues come from non-arm's length dealings, and their non-arm's length partners do not see revenue declines due to when revenues are realized on developments, for example, property completions. So for those that are seeking significant slowdowns at construction sites due to social distancing measures, using a requirement of a decline in qualifying revenues does not seem to capture this segment of the industry. Can you speak to that, Frances?
Hi, sorry, I just had to take it off mute. Look, I think as this wage subsidy is being developed, and let's just kind of, put it on the table that the legislation was literally passed Saturday night, which seems like a lifetime ago, but it really was 3 days, not counting Monday, which is a federal holiday. So I do want to make sure people are aware that these kinds of issues are being talked about at the Department of Finance as they're developing the details on the policy. We have had issues of kind of large, projects flagged as, potentially an area of additional concern. As we talked about earlier, there are some sectors and some types of industries where just the structure of cash flow and revenue realization is not the same as maybe others. So, I do encourage you to, get information in about, to illustrate a particular case. I usually ask people to give me an example so that I can actually forward it in and, make sure that it's at least in front of those people who are developing the details around the policy.
Thank you very much. So there are some other questions that are very specific. We will respond to you. But at this time, I would really like to thank our panelists that have joined us this morning. And thank you so much to Paula Cruikshank from the Business Development Bank of Canada, Avi Kay from Farm Credit Canada, and all the way from Ottawa, Francis McRae, Benoit Cadu, Benoit Tessier. Thank you so much. Again, the session is being recorded, and a survey link will be sent to you with the contact information for all of the facilitators from this morning. And I wanted to let you know that I've been so impressed by the civil service by both the provincial and federal governments. And there is an announcement forthcoming on and an amazing portal through the provincial government to really support business. So watch for that on Thursday. And ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you to the Port of Vancouver for their sponsorship. Later today, we are hearing from Canada's Minister of Economic Development, Melanie Joly, from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock for another Surrey Digital Town Hall. And please register at businessinsurrey.com. Ladies and gentlemen, make it a great and safe business day.